It's well known now that the Great Recession we've been suffering through was caused by massive fraud and greed on the part of the financial industry. Banks were giving out loans to people who didn't have the income to pay for them, and these loans came with features like rapidly adjusting mortgage interest rates, balloon payments that could never be met, and other features that pretty much guaranteed the loan would go bad. The banks wrote these loans with little more than a promise to pay by the borrowers, whether they had income or not. No documentation, no nothing. The loans were then packaged up and given a AAA rating by the rating agencies who were paid by the banks to put their golden seal of approval on them. Then they were sold to pension funds and other institutional investors who were largely unsophisticated. Some of the more unscrupulous banks like Goldman Sachs actually bet against the very loans they were selling to investors, all the while saying, hey, these are high quality and safe. So what happened? Well, not surprisingly, the loans, which were designed to blow up, blew up. And the banks suddenly saw their assets, which were these very mortgages, imploding. And of course, there was a huge outcry, yet the banks convinced our leaders that they needed to be bailed out, but not before some diehard industry shills like Hank Paulson, Tim Geithner, Alan Greenspan, Ben Bernanke pleaded this case. They said that, hey, if we didn't do this, the whole economy will go down the tubes. Down the tubes from their own making. But that was beside the point. So what happened? The money was given. At the same time, Ben Bernanke, who was the chairman of the Fed, he started handing out trillions of dollars in short-term loans to the banks. Meanwhile, during all this, not a single homeowner got even a dime. Even worse, the banks proceeded to foreclose on millions of people by way of forged and fraudulent foreclosure proceedings, robo-signings, forged documents. The stuff that if you or I had done something like that, even one iota of that, we would have been thrown in jail and they would have thrown the key away forever. So we had our first instance of fraud and criminality with the misrepresentation in the subprime crisis. Then we had the second case of fraud with the foreclosure scandal, and so far, not a single financial executive has gone to jail or even been prosecuted. None! You'd think someone would have wondered where our regulators were during all this. Where was the Fed, the chief bank regulator? Where was the Congress? Where were the banks themselves? After all, didn't Alan Greenspan tell us, remember Alan Greenspan, that great Ayn Randian? He said that self-interest alone was enough to keep these firms on the straight and narrow. Yeah, right. So shortly after this disaster that practically threw the whole world into a depression, we find out about the MF Global affair. John Corzine, former governor of New Jersey, former U.S. Senator, and of course co-CEO of none other than Goldman Sachs, we find out after he takes the helm of this firm back in 2010 and promptly runs it into the ground, that something like $1.5 billion of customer funds were missing. The funds were used to make bets in highly risky European debt securities. Customers were out of their money, and Corzine, when he was asked in front of a panel of his former joker peers in Congress where the money went, he said, I don't know. Hey, I'm just the CEO. What do I know? By the way, that excuse didn't work for Ken Lay. Remember him? He was the CEO of another failed Ponzi scheme called Enron. He was convicted and sentenced to prison. Poor Ken. Had he been a financial exec, he maybe would have gotten off scot-free. But again, we have to ask ourselves, where were the regulators? Where was the CFTC, who had direct oversight over MF Global? Where was the CME, the world's largest futures exchange and clearinghouse, whose job it was to oversee the positions, risk, and financial wherewithal of its members? The CME, by the way, was probably distracted because it was on one of its intense lobbying efforts in Congress in order to protect its turf, which is the pursuit of unbridled financial market gambling. That's what the CME's business is, right? It runs the world's largest casino. And by the way, if you pay more for gasoline, heating oil, or food, well, that's okay according to the CME because it's a free market. And they make sure that every senator and congressman that has any input into protecting their turf gets taken care of, if you know what I mean. All right, so forget about the CFTC. Forget about the CME. Where was the CFTC? They're supposed to be regulating all this stuff without self-interest. Oh, wait a minute. the chairman of the CFTC, Gary Gensler, he worked for, you guessed it, Goldman Sachs. And he was a former colleague of, you guessed it, John Corzine, who was the CEO of what firm? You guessed it again, Goldman Sachs. Once again, the fox guarding the hen house. We still don't know where the customer funds from MF Global disappeared to, and we'll probably never know because John Corzine is a former employee of, you guessed it, Goldman Sachs. Anyway, what happened next? Okay, so we had the subprime crisis, right? We had the financial crash, the bailouts. Then we had the MF Global affair. And after all that outcry and everything that the banks had wrought and the taxpayer funds that were used and still going towards helping the financial industry, then we find out that JP Morgan loses something like 5 or 10 billion on a highly risky trade that could have thrown the bank into chaos. Even after everything that these banks did and all the bailouts that they got, we see this once again happening when JP Morgan goes into this high stakes risk taking. They're not making loans, but trading on arcane and highly illiquid derivative contracts, making huge bets, speculating on things that bring nothing to society except pain when they don't work out. And how is Jamie Dimon treated after something like this? Well, when he goes up in front of Congress, he's considered some god. The fawning, self-serving members of Congress just all over this guy as if he's some Wall Street genius, when in fact he's a total joke. His bank makes a paltry 0.8% return on $2 trillion in assets. Jamie, why bother? You can buy a CD and make more money than that. And he's making those huge bets, and that's still all he's able to produce as a return for his bank, 0.8%. Then after the JP Morgan incident, which the CFTC never even got wind of, we have this Peregrine Financial, another futures commission merchant that blows out $200 million in customer funds. And again, nobody knows where the money is. Where was the CFTC there? The same CFTC that missed MF Global just 8 months before. Nowhere. Is that the end of it? Not at all. Next, we have the manipulation of Libor. Major banks once again rigging a system that is the benchmark for nearly all interest rate products. Mortgages, loans, CDs, swaps, derivatives, fixed income products. Once again, the world's investors are cheated so that a few institutions can make money, because that's the only way they know how to make money, by cheating or rigging the game. I'll tell you folks, it's truly unbelievable. And it's surely not the end. We're going to be seeing more of this because the entire system is bought. It's bought by the very crooks and thieves and lowlives that operate in the global financial system, by those on Wall Street. We are the victims of their predatory behavior, and there's nothing we can do. It's their money and influence that has corrupted all, and even law enforcement now works for them. I personally don't see a way out. Seriously, it will continue to happen, and these criminals will get off scot-free. In the end, we stand to lose it all, and we pretty much have already lost it all, but they're not going to stop until we're left with nothing and our society lay in ruins. Anyway, folks, that's it for now. This is Mike Norman saying bye-bye.